morning.
And good morning to those attending online and as well as anyone who might be watching via YouTube. Sorry we're getting started a few minutes late. My computer thought it was the weekend this morning, so it needed a little extra TLC to get us started. So this is the May edition of Housing Stat. And I'm excited to see y'all this morning. It's gonna be a little bit different today, just because probably the couple people that were probably the big presenters they had to go on vacation. So it's probably gonna be a little more of Gianna and I than y'all usually get.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, right. But we will hear from Philip and Florence and Sandy, so it won't be all us. So let's go ahead and get started. So really you all know why we're here, but for those that might be online for the first time and catching a housing stat meeting, why are we here? It's about accountability, but it's really to help us all work together to make sure that we're making progress on the mayor's highest priorities. And it's also, y'all are doing such great work. And so how do we really celebrate that too and give you all the ability and the platform to be able to really talk about the great work that's happening around the city. And housing stat, of course, is just one module, if you will, of the priority stat. A lot of you are very familiar with flood stat as well. And of course, there's other stats coming down the soon. So hopefully everyone in the room at least is familiar with this poster, Mayor T's priorities. The first one, they're not really necessarily in order of priority, if you will, but public safety, protecting our citizens from the impact of flooding and sea level rise, attainable and affordable housing for all of our residents, which is why we're here today. How do we enhance and diversify our transportation infrastructure, foster economic empowerment, to build an inclusive and equitable community, and then of course, quality of life issues that make really why everyone wants to come to Charleston, and creates some challenges for us as well. And also, while I'm just talking in my mind, anyone who is actually online in attendee mode, if you have any questions kind of throughout presentations, please feel free to send them through the Q&A, and we will do our best to address those questions as we go along. So, why are we here? Why do we have housing stat? It's really about ensuring an adequate supply of safe, quality housing options for all of our citizens. So the team, again, the whole idea behind priority stat was not to focus on one department at a time, right? We all need to be working together cross-departmentally to solve these issues for our residents. And so this has been a truly collaborative approach to how we got here today, and of course how we evolve going into the future, because it's always opportunity for us to do better and improve. So this has been a really great team working together really since the beginning. So the things that we are focused on for housing stat, we kind of broke them into kind of 4 categories. The first being create and maintain vibrant, diverse, and safe neighborhoods. The second one is to increase the supply of low income, affordable, and workforce housing. So we kind of have the percent AMIs that kind of define those in that KPI there. The third one is around homelessness. So how do we decrease the number of individuals experiencing homelessness in the city? And then, of course, how do we improve the regulatory environment? So reducing barriers to help make sure that we can do our part to try and keep housing costs as low as possible. So on today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about seniors. So that's going to be a little bit of multifaceted effort. I'm going to try to I'll do my best to try to set the stage from a data perspective and kind of how we got to some numbers. And then I'm going to turn it over to Gianna, and I think Bill's going to kind of round us out with some of the things happening in planning. This is going to kind of update us on related to AMI. I think those numbers have just been updated and released, so we'll get an update there. I think about creating affordable units near transit. So we have a specific goal associated with that. And then the preservation of low and moderate income homes. Again, Gianna. So, and we may not necessarily go in that order, but those are the things that are on our agenda to cover today. Oh, sorry. That's our next public meeting, so y'all will have to bear with me for 1 second. Switch gears to another PowerPoint. And kind of present everything. So glad we're going to kick off with seniors. So I'm really glad to see Jamie Roper is attending virtually. Of course, Jamie, I invite you to jump in at any point. And good morning, Mayor.
Good morning, Mayor.
We have a seat for you up front if you would like it.
What's that?
So we have a seat for you up front if you would like it, but feel
I
free to
would,
sit
but I'm
wherever.
going to get a cup of coffee maybe.
Yes, please help yourself. So, and for those of you attending online, there are coffee and snacks in the room, so if that encourages you to attend in person next time, we would love to see you here in the public meeting room. Yeah, I'm not above that, to be honest. Okay. So I'm going to try to set the table a little bit to kind of, how we got to the number that we think that we need for seniors. So y'all have heard this number, a zillion times at this point, but the comprehensive plan indicated that we need an additional 16,000, at least 16,000 low-income, affordable, and workforce housing units by 2030. 2030 is like right around the corner, and that's a pretty daunting number for us to achieve. It's a lot. So I think we're doing everything we can, but we got to do a lot more and figure out how to get more affordable units available to residents. So in Charleston County recently released a plan, and they estimate that they need an additional 29,000 to 36,000 additional housing units over the coming decade. So that feels like a pretty big number as well. And so, kind of that question then becomes like, okay, well, how much do we actually need for seniors? And when we're talking about seniors today, we kind of put that 65 and over, kind of age range on it. So, and honestly, I feel like I'm approaching this very fast. So I really want to know how y'all are going to take care of me in 3 years. So this chart kind of shows the seniors as a percentage of total population, and this is for the city of Charleston. So if we look back in 2010, seniors were 12% of the population. We know that the total population has increased dramatically over the last decade in Charleston. We've seen a 25% increase in the total population. But what's also happening is as the recent ACS in 2021 shows that 65 and over are now 16.2% of our total population. So not only is the total percentage of population increasing, the total percentage of seniors that make up that total population is rapidly increasing as well. So again, 16.2% are 65 and over. That's an increase of 60% since 2010. And then if we go and look at those that are 60 and over, that's 20.8% of our population. So those are the people that by 2030, right, are going to be in that age bracket that we're looking at. So this just takes a snapshot look at geographic mobility. So the first line is kind of the total population, and what this looks at is like that first graph is how many people from one year to another, and this is looking at I think 2020 to 21 because it's the 2021 ACS. How many people were in the same house? So kind of logic tells us that probably the younger you are, the more likely you are to move around, and obviously we're seeing that in this chart. And then of course, when we look at those in the same county, really when we talk about 60 and 65 and over, these two charts are almost 100% of the population. So not a whole lot of geographic mobility. So that kind of indicates to us that most of the folks that are here, they're probably here to stay. So just a couple of bullet points on seniors. Approximately 50% of senior householders earn up to 100% of AMI. 6% are living alone, compared to 35% of the total population. Almost 20% are veterans, compared to 7% of the total population. 30% of those are disabled. We actually have 20% that are actually in the labor force. So a little information on housing tenure and cost burden households. So I think a good thing is that when we look at that 60 and over and 65 and over, they're more likely to be in a home that they own. So that's kind of that first chart to the left that shows the owner occupied. And then the second chart, the second graph in that first chart is actually renter occupied. And the green again in this chart is the total population, with the blue being 60 and over, and then the brown being 65 and over. And then if we go and look at the next chart and talk about cost burden households, we see that those age groups are, even whether they rent or own, they are more likely to be cost burdened. And it's much more so if they rent. What do we know about senior housing? We've got approximately 2,000 existing units that are actually designated for seniors. Almost 1,400 are housing units for seniors that are affordable. There's been some fluctuation in waiting lists and wait times for senior housing, so it varies widely. If Jamie has some additional info, please feel free to jump in, Jamie. But the indication is that that can vary from 6 months to 3 years, and one waiting list can vary from maybe 7 individuals up to 22 people on a waiting list for a unit
Or more.
or more. Yes, it's a lot.
I just add, Tracy, to that, especially with your public housing authorities, the waiting lists are the longer of the waiting lists that exist.
Okay, yeah, so that's even more alarming.
Yes.
And so just a little, and Kat from housing put these little nuggets together. So home prices have increased 78% since 2011, and rents up 50% since 2010. So those are significant increases, especially when you think about seniors who may be on on more fixed income. And of course, like the growth in prices has significantly outpaced income. So even those that are in the workforce are being challenged to be house burden, right? And so home values grew 135% faster than homeowner incomes. Next one, the average market rate has not been affordable to the median renter at any point in the past 2 decades. And of course, in the city plan and all their outreach, there was a lot of concern that aging residents can't really stay in their homes, either because of costs and maintenance and things like that, and maybe accessibility, and of course concern about what options are available to them if they feel like they can't age in place. I don't know, Chloe, you have any other additional information on that from the city plan?
No, I think that summarizes it, that people feel kind of stuck where they are, because if they were to move, they wouldn't be able to find anything in their community that is affordable.
Yeah. Great. But thank you. So, what do we think we need? We, as a team, we really got together and tried to, think about what does this really mean? And looking at the numbers, we really thought that if we take that 16,350 number, we feel like at least 2,600 of those affordable units really need to be designated for seniors. And it's probably a range, but we felt like that was a really good place to start as a goal. And as we learn more, obviously that might fluctuate a little, but we felt like that was a good number, a good percentage to actually start with. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Gianna.
Tracy, this is Jamie. Can I add one thing to that?
Yes, please, Jamie.
I apologize because I'm driving, so I have had to pull over. One of the other things, a lot of those senior housings are tax credit property. And unfortunately, a lot of those tax credit property in a few years are going to come to maturity, which means they run for about 15 years, and then the owners have to reassess whether they're going to reapply for those tax credits. A lot of what has been happening is a lot of those are becoming senior communities and no longer really becoming low income housing. So that is another thing on the horizon that we have to keep in mind as well. They're low cost, affordable housing now for those seniors, but if those owners choose not to renew that tax credit, that will add to the need for housing for those seniors.
I would just append to that, as we think, for instance, about those tax credit projects where the city's been involved and we have them under either ground lease or the option to lease, which is two documents that go together. At the end of the ground lease period, both the land and the improvements come back to the city. So we do have the option to retain those as affordable for the long time. So many of what you see going up currently, James Lewis Jr., that is under a ground lease now, that is a family unit. So those will be forever, unless city council decides differently, affordable. Archer, that deal is slightly different, but that is 88 units, so we'll be able to subtract that 88 from the 2,600 estimate that we had on the previous slide. Yes, and so several of those units are several of the newer developments that we see coming up, and we'll talk about later on. We will have the opportunity to retain those for perpetuity if we choose to, if we being city council in the future. And I just wanted to point that out. Jamie makes an excellent point, because developers do have the option at the end of their conformance or performance period with low-income housing tax credits to opt out unless they have city funding, which often requires an additional 15 years or a total of 30. So we do have some coverage, but not probably as much as we want. Senior housing units in the city of Charleston, I would say between the funding that the Department of Housing and Urban Development, along with state housing, low-income housing tax credits, have funded the majority of the senior units that we have in the city of Charleston currently. And that is beyond those that are owned by your local or your public housing authorities. And I would say to us, for those who do not know, there are 3 public housing authorities here locally: Charleston County, City of Charleston, and the City of North Charleston all have public housing authorities. I believe, and Florence, correct me if I'm wrong, that the City of Charleston Housing Authority probably owns the larger amount of inventory out of those particular ones. Although I know Charleston County tends to have a bulkier amount. And y'all didn't make this slide for people who are 50 and over because these numbers are little.
It
So,
wasn't me.
I'll just tell y'all that right now. So I'm gonna get up. Low income units, 1379, Mayor's laughing because he can appreciate that. You see here some of the market rate units on the lower portion of the slide. And often in these, if they have been facilitated or constructed under a PUD, we still get a certain percentage of those under, and Florence is shaking her head, so I'm saying it correctly. We get a percentage of those for affordable. I want to say 20%, but I always want the numbers to be higher than they are. We negotiate. Okay, and so our planners are making sure that that negotiation will be easier in the future because we're putting requirements in the PUD, hopefully. Chloe's just smiling gently. And then we will hopefully be able to negotiate more, but through support of mayor and council, what you see here includes both affordable, all senior housing for the most part funded in different ways. You can go to the next slide. So always the goal is to preserve what we have, because certainly if you can preserve what you have, it keeps you from having to create additional. You're not consistently swimming upstream. And so in the Department of Housing and Community Development, in addition to working under our HI to build new units, we also have preservation of housing. And we facilitate that through our roof replacement programs and our substantial and limited substantial rehab programs. And so what you see here is some of the activity that we engage in and we've engaged in from 2016 to 2022, with over the last 7 years rehabbing 114 homes for homeowners 62 and over. And please stop me with questions if you have those. And home ownership initiative for seniors. I mentioned the home ownership initiative before, and oftentimes when we think of seniors, we don't think of home ownership, but it's always exciting when we see especially seniors who are buying for the first time. 18 total senior citizens became first-time home buyers by purchasing homes in the city of Charleston, and that's the data that you see before you there. We have a 90-year restrictive covenant on those units that are created under our first-time home buyer program. And Sandy's going to speak to this more specifically, but I would just say to us, typically, especially with low-income housing tax credit projects, state housing looks for certain criteria when you are developing those homes, one of which is near transit. Oftentimes because seniors may not own homes, or persons of certain income ranges may not own homes. So that is one of the point criteria for state housing, that you're looking at building housing that's not far out in the boonies, if you will, but literally near public transit, where if folks choose to, they have the option to actually access public transportation. Sandy, you want to jump in on this one?
Sure.
Those slides are up.
While Tracy's pulling those up, there's an additional senior housing project underway further along. Archer is much closer to being done than this other one, but with the two combined, the next couple of years, that would be 157 senior units, affordable senior units we could deduct from that.
All right, Cindy,
All right, thank you. So as Gianna mentioned, one of the goals for any new affordable housing units that are developed is to make sure that they have access to transit, and specifically to meet those criteria for state funds. That target number for that criteria is to have 85% of the new units in development be less than a half mile to a bus stop. The numbers that you see up on the screen are what I calculated last week with the current projects that are being built. So we are meeting that criteria. We are currently at 86%. There are 30 actively being developed under construction affordable housing projects going on right now. So from those 30 sites, there were, let's see that, 866 units that are less than a half mile to bus stop out of a total of 1,003 units in development. So that gives us that 86.3%. I just wanted to show you very quickly how I actually got that number, which, like I mentioned, was calculated last week. So we use mapped locations of affordable housing and transit stops. So the map here shows the overall city area, and the point locations, little dots, you can tell on the map on the screen, are the CARTA bus stops that we get directly from CARTA, and they have to update those annually, sometimes a little more often, so we get as up to date as we can. And the projects, the affordable housing projects, are pulled from our permit system. So that data that I used last week was pulling from the live permit system that's tracking that affordable housing as it goes through development. So those are on the map as well. And what we do is take that in our GIS software, which is a spatial mapping software that does a lot of analysis and has tools that we can do analysis. And I run that and run tools that take the housing and use the streets to find the closest walking distance to a bus stop. So it's not going to take you on a highway where you're walking on I-26. So, it has different guidelines and parameters you can set to calculate those routes. But even so, if you go to the next slide, I do check those numbers and kind of verify them, to sort of look through them and make sure that everything makes sense. When I first ran it last week, there were some that came up a little weird. It was telling me that some of the housing sites were like 7-10 miles away from a bus stop. Like, I know that's not true. I know there's one right there. So it turned out that since I was just using the CARTA stops, some of those bus stop locations were through the Tri-County Link system. So I went to their site and brought those points into the mapping tools and got much better numbers. So what we end up with is, zoomed in on the peninsula, as you can see those routes, and all of those blue lines are the routes, and those are linked to the table of data, so I could use that to calculate those numbers, the total units and the total distance. Get that number, make sure we're meeting the criteria.
I think a little nuance here that I just want to point it out. You hit it, but I want to point it out because a lot of people, if you say like, oh, we're going to do an analysis and do a half mile from the transit stop, you know, a lot of people would just do it from at the crow flies distance. But I think that, so that's really important to actually go in and like, okay, what's the path that someone should walk to get to that transit stop to make sure that we are really meeting that test. So that's fantastic.
And there actually was one, I can't remember the site, where it made sense sort of, but the site was on a larger parcel, so it picked the starting point sort of like on the back end of the property where the buildings probably are not going to be constructed, and it took this really weird route. So I went in and actually manually edited that because no real person would have chosen that route to get to a bus stop that was on the right around the corner. So even though it does a lot of the analysis for us, it still needs a person to take a look and make sure it makes sense.
And as I go back to this, to the main deck that we were using, I do want to point out too that we were talking about seniors and we were shifted to all affordable units. So I think we're going to come back to seniors a little bit now. So I just want to make sure that we got that straight for folks for you all, for us, and for folks that are, might be with us online.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
So as we continue our efforts to enhance the amount of housing, and in particular for seniors, naturally creating and supporting senior housing, and Chloe mentioned another set of units that are forthcoming. Humanities Foundation, and naturally they're under a separate LLC when they construct. They're building Archer, but they also worked with the city more than 3 years ago to also secure another site near Lee Street, so that'll be senior as well. Preserve existing housing for seniors, which we talked about previously, very important. Build new senior housing, support seniors who are renters in the city of Charleston, and we do that in many ways. Oftentimes that is at the beginning when a unit or when units are being initially constructed. We are putting some level of funding in the form of subsidy in those units to ensure their longer term affordability, and then where appropriate promote senior home ownership, because that is happening as well. Okay, and so what the future holds. You see a photo here. We had a panel discussion at the Mayor's Commission on Homelessness and Affordable Housing held a few weeks ago. And we had several developers that preserve housing. Operation Home was there. We had representatives from Humanities Foundation there. We also had a construction lead from Trident. State Housing was there. And the goal was really to talk through and show the public what literally happens as it relates to the financing of affordable housing and the reality of where we are right now. And so much of what came out of that was a discussion overall, not simply about senior housing, but housing in its totality. But certainly to proactively advance affordable housing preservation priorities, work with partners and housing developers to convene a regional preservation coalition and engage in a series of educational forums related to affordable workforce and attainable housing, conduct outreach to owners to understand capital and the financial needs for preservation and for sharing that information. And the team member put on here an example of Artillery Point. We are working with the Charleston water system right now. Artillery Point is a community on Johns Island, and we're attempting to help those individuals move from septic systems to sewer systems out there. And of course, there's cost involved with that, but literally there are so many advantages to them doing that. And literally it's about 40 residents in that community who we've been engaging with over the last several months. But it really speaks to that preservation, because I want to say 50% or more of those folks are in that age category that we consider seniors. So really working closely with them to understand the environmental benefits, the economic benefits, and just really how they preserve their homes and their lives in a more proficient way. And so that's really important to what we're attempting to do as well.
And I think, so Philip was gonna maybe talk a little bit about what's happening in the world of zoning.
Sure, I can touch on this. So as we started digging into this important subcategory of housing, trying to establish kind of a baseline, kind of where we are, what the numbers are, and starting to think about what our goals and priorities are to target this senior housing issue. One of the things we started looking at was, what are our regulatory, permitting, and policies that we have today, or we can develop. What tools are available to us, right now that we can use to increase the amount of senior housing and housing in general. So in looking at our zoning code, of course, one of our biggest regulatory development, permitting type tools, we do have some aspects that touch on senior housing, but more specifically elderly housing. We do have a zoning district, it's called the diverse residential DR4, specifically elderly housing. But it's really geared towards more like assisted living type facilities. So it's not necessarily independent living or, age restricted or age specific housing. But it is a tool for us that allows us to kind of get a little more specific in targeting certain areas of the city. For instance, we do have throughout the city about 158 acres of this zoning category, and it is spread out throughout all geographic areas of the city as an indicator of where we're seeing demand, or at least being able to target where senior housing can and should occur. So just from a regulatory standpoint, and this is somewhat anecdotal, just based on demand that we've seen, from the development folks in senior housing, but more specifically in this case, assisted living, there's a good bit going on, as in the recent past, as far as developing assisted living. And so, there don't appear to be any real regulatory barriers to developing at least assisted living type facilities. Now, senior housing, as far as like low income or targeting specific age groups, that might be a little bit different story. But as far as the DR4 district, it's not necessarily an incentive-based district. I think it's just something we established years ago, just from anecdotal research. Nobody in our department, I think, was in zoning or planning in our department at the time we developed the elderly housing district. But it's not an incentive-based district, but it is targeted towards this kind of specific type of housing. And so it does have things that you might not have for other multifamily developments. It might target different aspects of your parking requirements. Things that it might allow even some retail or personal services on the same site or nearby. For instance, things like the elderly might need, which banking services, postal services, even like beauty salons and that sort of thing that you can have on site, which you might not normally have in any kind of normal multifamily development. So as far as the zoning aspects, we have this DR4 district, but we also have PUDs, as Gianna mentioned, and this is planned unit developments, which is kind of a customized zoning category that the city has a good bit of control over, and therefore we can get specific things that might target elderly housing, if that's an aspect that we need for a specific area that we're dealing with. And then, of course, as Sandy mentioned, our zoning can target, especially with density requirements or incentives, target areas that are the most appropriate for senior housing. Something that might be closer to transit or closer to other services that might be a little different than the general population. So that that's kind of where we are as far as zoning regulatory tools. But in the future, we do have the opportunity with a new zoning code that we are just embarking on for the entire city. There probably is some untapped potential as far as incentive-based zoning districts or zoning rules that might allow us or help us to develop senior housing, especially in areas where we really need it more.
Our accessory dwelling unit ordinance, even though it's not targeted specifically for seniors, it seems or is accepted nationally as a tool for aging in place. It's another housing option that may be better for someone who, they could move their backyard and rent out their full house if they want a smaller space. And so that is seen as an option. And Gianna, I don't know if you've seen of the people who have made inquiries into funding for ADUs, has any of them been for seniors?
None, not today. Only, I take that back, there was one gentleman who was looking to do it for his mom.
So we haven't seen a huge demand for ADUs yet. But we're hoping that change. So maybe when interest rates.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you hit on the new zoning, because that was gonna be one of my questions, like, does that present a good opportunity? Are you guys talking about that and kind of work on these zoning codes and how to incentivize some of these things? So.
Right, and this is good timing that we're sort of digging into this, so we can develop those priorities, because that'll be important as we start discussing, what our needs are for the new zoning code.
I love that idea with those on-site services and readily available to seniors. And we see that in a lot of the market rate development, so it would be nice to add that to those developments that include our affordable low-income threshold, so, yeah.
Curious, like what other, I know we have like the fee in lieu. I know we just kind of, that's just used broadly for affordable, is there, should we think about the certain percentage of, units developed using the fee in lieu fund? Should it include seniors, or, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out for, for thought
The
discussion.
mayor and I are laughing, that is and I see Amy, our CFO's face over there. I don't know how many times we use and reuse that money. The CFO's team keeps us in check on respending that money.
We believe in recycling.
We believe strongly in recycling. So that money has traditionally been used for acquisition of properties, because as I think was mentioned earlier in the slides that we looked at, the cost for land has gone up substantially. And we are, whether we want to recognize it or not, in competition with the market rate developers who can go a lot faster than we can in even acquiring properties. And so we have tried to control that from the standpoint of really looking at it to acquire and then to build. And so there could actually be a benefit to senior housing. And because the need is so great, we don't necessarily say senior housing, because family units could also be used for seniors as well. So the question will become whether we want to focus specifically on that, knowing that the need is there. And I think supporting developers like Humanities Foundation will result in us seeing senior units built. City through mayor and council put $4.4 million in Archer. So that's a substantial investment in senior housing. And literally all of the developments that you all saw on the screen earlier, the city's funding either from the federal government through home funding or general fund dollars were invested in each one of those units. So either land or cash or a combination of both. So we played a pivotal role in what you see now, and I don't see that will change tremendously, because usually they're coming to the city to ask for what the city can do.
To incentivize, the private developers is our best tool, the zoning code, or is there other?
Right now, it probably is, just based on what we've seen with the success of our MU workforce housing districts. And if in the future there could be more, kind of inclusionary zoning regulations available to us, if state regulations were to change a bit. But I think incentive-based is really kind of the trend for zoning codes, incentive-based zoning districts. So I think we do have more potential to use them than we are currently.
I think you touched on something that probably a lot of people don't realize, that we are a little hamstringed, right, by the state regulations. Do you want to touch on that just a little bit?
He doesn't.
Well, just from a legal standpoint, I don't know that much about it. However, just based on what I do know is, yeah, we've been reluctant to make some changes based on what we believe state law prohibits us from doing, and that does include creating zoning that requires certain, it requires developers to do certain things. And so, in other words, inclusionary, or in this case, inclusionary housing, meaning requiring certain types of development, like low income development or affordable housing, workforce housing, that sort of thing. But there does seem to be demand and changes, nationwide that might eventually reach our state. We're hopeful.
Well said, Philip, well said.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
That's
I feel like there were probably people that might listen to this that don't realize that there are some, we don't get to make all the rules, right? So
Unfortunately.
So I'm gonna pick up on that thought and just further say, we are not enabled by state law to have inclusionary zoning. And henceforth, we don't. The Riley administration came up with the mixed use designations that are voluntary and incentive based, but they are pretty well restricted to the peninsula. And so I really view our zoning rewrite that we're now embarked upon as a real opportunity to make some changes to expand voluntary and incentive-based zoning, not just on the peninsula, but other parts of the city, and particularly where you have the elevation where we want to promote density. The suggestion I had thus far, I'm waiting for somebody to come up with a better idea, was, and there was some pushback because, whenever you take away someone's rights, people get concerned. I get that. But if you hadn't built on a property yet, you hadn't taken advantage of any rights. So if you reduce the allowable density or market rate and provide an incentive for DR4 or these other zoning categories to where you could get even more density, but you gotta have the affordable percentage added to it, to me, that would be a step in the right direction. And I'll repeat it again. I mean, we have seen so many apartments develop, particularly West Ashley, James Island, where there was no affordability requirement. I just got to believe that the allowable density was too high to start with. If you want to, build a 250 unit apartment, you ought to have to get the incentive to get there, which would require some affordability. I don't know how else to do it. If somebody's got a better idea, please speak up. Hopefully we'll figure that out over the next few months as we go through our zoning rewrite. So I did, I guess while I'm chatting here, I mean, you're probably doing this, but I want to make sure, Jamie mentioned the credits that are burning off on some of these senior units, or make sure we're tracking when those credits burn off so that we're in touch with the appropriate owners, 2 or 3 years in advance. We're doing that, right?
Yes, State Housing actually sends out a notice such that we are aware. Oftentimes we can help facilitate maintaining those, and sometimes it's beyond our control because of cost.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Would it be good if we could track those independently, getting a notice? There are not that many of them, right?
Well, locally we do. The
Yeah.
ones here in Charleston, we absolutely track, but literally they send out notices, especially for our area. So yes, sir.
And Mayor, we do, in our affordable housing database that we created and are maintaining through our permitting system, we are tracking affordability periods of all affordable housing in the city, so
Oh,
we can
great.
project those numbers out at any time, for any time period.
We ought to have a tickler system where 2 to 3 years out, we're on the phone talking to whoever it might be and make sure we're in the game, so to speak, if they're gonna sell the property or if they're gonna try to do something other than affordable with it. And then, the last point or question I wanted to make was, just thinking about the numbers and the growth of seniors. And, I'm not worried about the seniors that are moving here, retiring here. Most of them come here, they've got adequate retirement income. And in fact, you know, there's product planned to be built for senior housing that's at what I would call market rate plus. You know, it's high-end type product. They do a great job. Of Bishop Gadsden ain't cheap, you know. Courier Square 2 is going to build this wonderful residential facility, but I bet it's going to be $4,000 or $5,000 a month, you know. And so I think that part of the market is going to take care of itself. And it seems to me the most critical subset to focus on is those seniors who are living here now, who are constrained by their income. And I know you got the roof replacement and the rehab, but the numbers aren't really big on the number of units that we're able to help. And I would just challenge us to brainstorm of other programs we could tie into or bring forward to help seniors in place, not the ones moving here, but the ones that are here already. And that's a particular challenge. A lot of times people talk about the property taxes going up. I think that gets overblown because we do have those 5-year limits as if you don't sell your home. But they're just there's a whole nother layer of maintenance, you know, and some faith-based groups and Habitat are now doing more rehab projects and new construction, and maybe we ought to find a couple of more good partners like that to really try to do more outreach to keep seniors in place. That makes sense.
Mayor, totally agree. In fact, we added this past year, we were working with Operation Home, Charleston Habitat. We've now added PCAP to the rehab component.
Oh, great.
To your point, the need is tremendous. It is great. And even when I think about minor rehab of senior housing, it's often not enough. In fact, I have 2 in mind that we will likely try to pull money from elsewhere to just get these houses in a better state. I won't describe it in totality, but they're really bad. And people are still, they live in those houses that are in really bad shape. And so beyond that, we met with, we've been meeting with developers as we typically do, but one of the things, this is a private sector developer who has done housing throughout the United States of America. Chloe and us and the planning team have been working steadfastly on perfecting our approval processes. And one of the things that he mentioned is that process. And so we've been meeting with the boards. We met with DRB maybe 2 weeks ago now, the design review board members around how we improve those things and how we bring to bear projects that are ready and make sure the developers that are coming in have teams that understand processes. And so perfecting that system is really important because it can literally take us 5 years or so starting a project before we literally start construction, which is an amazingly long time. And so we really need to continue to work through those kinks, I think on both sides, but especially with our developers to make sure we're coming in more prepared so that we could get to that end game a lot faster.
So back to the rehab, one other thought that's crossed my mind that you mentioned to me in years past is the red tape that we encounter with those programs because we're using federal dollars. And it seems to me if we could take a hard look, Amy, at which dollars we're using for that program, if we could use the federal dollars somewhere else and use some other non-federal dollars for the roof rehab, it would make the process go smoother, a little more flexible, and not have all those boxes you gotta check off when you're using the federal dollars. And it's not that much money that we got in it, is it?
So it varies, Mayor, because oftentimes with the roof, we're doing other things in the house. And so those 2 homes that I mentioned, I'm coming to Amy for the fee and lieu money for those. It'll bail us, Amy, I promise, but those houses are so bad, I have to include non-federal money with the federal money in order to get us to the point where we can make those houses happen. So we do try to balance where we can and look for other sources of funds in addition to what we receive. But to your point, there are more requirements when you're using federal dollars. We've kind of worked through and improved the environmental review process with those. We have a tiered review process now that enables us to move those faster. But I think it still comes down, especially with rehab, to capital, because we are servicing folks that are seniors that are on that limited income that you mentioned. And sometimes we run into some challenges where those titles are a little bit scary. And so those are part of the process that we're trying to work through to make it easier and enhance those numbers, because the need is absolutely greater than the numbers that we're servicing.
Do you have something?
No, I was just gonna say that our housing development department does an awesome job of partnering with a lot of those organizations that do the rehab. And even a couple of years ago, we tried to apply for a grant to increase the dollars to do the rehab. But what we find out is we end up competing with those same partners who've been in the game for a lot longer than we have. So we were not able to obtain that grant. And the money out there is so few, but the needs of those rehabs are great. And the rehabs are sometimes so massive. The cost far outweighs the ability to meet those needs.
Yeah, I mean, and going back to the innovation, work that we did last year, we really found that help, not to take us down a rabbit hole with this, but if we can kind of handle those maintenance things early on, and prevent them from escalating to severe issues, that's something that could be really worrisome about how to get to those things before they become so bad that we're having to use all sorts of resources to just get a couple of homes in a reasonable condition.
So I don't really mind somebody else getting the money as long as the work is getting done, And so maybe it'd be a good idea to try to survey all our faith groups, all our nonprofits, and find out everybody doing any kind of rehab program, and try to have a little summit, get everybody in one room, and try to get a little more collective effort going on. I hear about these groups, I call them sometimes, that bring in, a church group for a week or two they come from all over the place, and they come really equipped to do some serious work, and I think maybe networking with everybody doing that would be a positive thing. We could try that.
Any questions? Right. I think we have a little more info. I don't think Ms. Florence, if you want to walk everybody through the new AMI data. Switching gears a little bit, right?
It just changed, so I don't have much to add. Can I stay over there?
Yeah, you can go wherever you like.
Stand up in the center of the circle and your voice.
It helps your voice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just got the 2023 area median income and rents this week. As a matter of fact, I printed it out yesterday. And so quickly, we've got an increase in the area median income from 91,800 to 97,200.
For a family of four?
Yes. So it may sound, like a lot, but really you have an overall increase in rents to match that of $50 to $75 increase in rents. So the rents for the people at 50% AMI went up from 803 to 851. And for those at 65% of the area median income, it went from 1025 to 1086. For those at 80%, it went up from 1285 to 1361.25. So, and that's what it should be. What it actually is a different story. So even for seniors in those low-income housing, tax credit units, there's, the income doesn't increase anything, but they will also get an increase in rent. And so right about now or next week, I will get like lots of calls saying, my rent went up, and some of them have to move because they really can't afford it. So even though you see the increase in the AMI, remember it's an average, and as you drill down to the actual people, it's not making that much of a difference. It's still basically unaffordable, and even the rents that is considered affordable is becoming unaffordable. Now, at the housing authorities, they give the adjustments for the utilities, and the seniors also in those low-income housing tax credits, they get those adjustments. But even with those adjustments, their Social Security is not going up that much, or their pension, whatever. So overall, we're still in the same place, even though numbers change and they look good. Now, for the homeowner, I think the median income is going to help some people who couldn't afford, to purchase, actually to make that step up. But in making the step up, they're losing some of their down payment assistance, because now they're used to being the 80%, where at 80% of the area median income, you can get money from the Federal Home Loan Bank, you can get money from the state and some of the other lenders. But now you jump, and with that increase, you're in the 100% or the 120% area median income, where there's no additional dollars except for what the city is providing. And I know it looks, very bleak, but in fairness to the city, I have to say, we're the only ones with any of these programs up and running and making a difference in the lives of our citizens. Nobody else is doing it as a municipality. So regardless of what people may say on the negative or on the positive, the city is doing something versus those who aren't. So we know it's a challenge, and just working with what we have, and I think we're doing a good job.
Go City.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much. I just make a quick point on when we look at the population patterns in terms of in-migration, so we know Charleston's a growing city, right? We all know that. We feel the pressure. So when we see the rise in area median income, that's more so a reflection of the demographics of the population moving here and less of a reflection of people's wages increasing locally. I don't have that broken down to say exactly what percentage of that is from, wage increase and what percentage of that is just a more affluent population living here. But that's just something to keep in mind, that as our population grows and it's attracting more affluent people, that is causing that area median income to shift up. So I think that's an important. Absolutely, yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that, because we've talked about that before, so that's a really, really, really good thing to bring up.
You get so many phone calls
Yeah, right.
when the rents go up, right? Because it's similar to what I was expressing a few minutes ago about the seniors who are moving here. They all have nice pensions or, incomes, and it's all these folks coming here with income and higher paying jobs or whatever has driven up AMI, which then when it adjusts annually gives, it's a blanket increase, Florence. Like if I have 10 units that are at 80% AMI and I get your notice, then I can go ahead and raise the rent on those 10 units,
As
right?
soon as the lease is up, yes.
So it's not based on the individual income of that tenant.
No.
It's just based on the AMI. So, you know, we want people to make more money, but if it's not the right people, then this increase might be hurting those who you know, are underemployed or on fixed income. It seems like it's working against us in a way.
It is, absolutely.
Ouch.
Yeah. Well, going back to something positive, I love the idea of.
Well, I think it's just important for us and our community to understand the dynamic of this.
Yes, yes.
And it just even further accentuates the whole nature of the problem. You know, which finally, I think the business community, the chamber, I mean, everybody seems to be finally getting in line in agreement that this is a fundamental, almost crisis for our region, limiting our future economic growth, the issue of affordability of housing. I mean, I've really felt it over the last 4 or 5 years on the business community side that their eyes are getting open. They're waking up that, you know, we got to do something. So, which is a good thing, actually getting them to do something, Florence. So we're not the only municipality, you know, doing this. We're not there yet, but I feel like some of that momentum is building.
Yeah, which is, that's a positive note, so, yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, did I miss anything that we were supposed to? All right, well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today, and thanks for the folks joining online or watching online. And we actually take the summer off from Housing Stat, so we actually will not have a public Housing Stat meeting again until September. So thanks, everybody, and hope everyone has a great Thursday.
If I could add one more thanks to everybody being here and being a part of this, because I think the old paradigm, even in the city, was, oh, this is Gianna's problem. This is housing and community development. And the whole point of doing Housing Stat like this is part of the awareness is that it's much bigger than one department. It's really a collective community issue that we all need to pull together on. So thank you, Tracy, for your leadership and just the Housing Stat part of it, but Gianna, particularly with your department. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.